The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and sorrow across the cracked earth of Bitter Creek, a town clinging to the edge of nowhere in the New Mexico territory. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, coating everything in a fine gray veil that stung the eyes and clung to the throat. Elias Kane rode into town atop his gray mare, Juniper, his hat pulled low against the unrelenting sun. His face, weathered by years under open skies, bore lines carved not just by time but by choices, some his own, some forced upon him. The colt at his hip hung heavy, a reminder of the man he'd been and the one he was trying to leave behind. Bitter Creek was a place where dreams went to die. Its single street was lined with sagging buildings, a saloon with a crooked sign, a general store with warped boards, a boarding house where the windows stared blankly like empty eyes. Elias had come here chasing a rumor of work, a quiet job breaking horses or mending fences, anything to keep his hands busy and his ghosts at bay. For 6 months, he drifted through the territory, running from the memory of a night in Abilene when blood had stained his hands and his sister's screams had filled the air. She'd died because he hadn't been fast enough, hadn't been smart enough. That failure lived in him now, a shadow that rode closer than his own. He dismounted outside the livery, his boots stirring clouds of dust. A boy, all elbows and nervous eyes, took Juniper's reins. "Feed her well," Elias said, his voice low, like gravel underfoot. He pressed a coin into the boy's hand, his movements deliberate, every gesture measured to keep the world at arm's length. His eyes, the color of slate after rain, scanned the street. Men loitered outside the saloon, their laughter sharp and hollow. A woman in a faded dress hurried past, her gaze fixed on the ground. Bitter Creek was a town of broken things, and Elias fit right in. He was headed for the general store to ask about work when a cry cut through the air, a sharp, desperate sound from the alley beside the saloon. Most men would have kept walking. Elias had tried to be that kind of man once, but it had cost him everything. He turned toward the sound, his boots silent in the dust. The alley was a narrow slit of shadow, reeking of spilled whiskey and despair. A girl no older than 18 was pinned against the wall, her dark hair spilling over a torn shawl. Her eyes, wide and green as spring grass, were bright with fear. A man loomed over her, his breath sour with liquor, one meaty hand gripping her arm. "You run again, Lila, and I'll break more than your spirit," he growled. Behind him stood another figure, a woman with a painted face and eyes like chipped flint. "You owe me, girl," she said, her voice cold as a winter stream. "You don't get to walk away." Elias stepped into the alley, his shadow falling across the trio. The man turned, his face a map of scars and bad decisions. "This ain't your business, stranger," he spat, his hand twitching toward the knife at his belt. Elias didn't move, didn't speak. His presence was enough, a quiet force that shifted the air. His gaze locked on the man's hand, then slid to Lila's face. Her fear was a mirror to his own past, and it stirred something deep, something he'd tried to bury. "Let her go," Elias said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The man laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and took a step forward. "You think you're some kind of hero," he sneered, raising the knife. Elias moved faster than thought, his left hand seizing the man's wrist, twisting until the blade clattered to the ground. His right fist followed, a single precise strike that sent the man sprawling into the dust. The woman with the painted face gasped, her composure cracking. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Lila belongs to me. You're stealing property." Elias's hand rested on his colt, not drawing, just waiting. "She's no one's property," he said, his words quiet but final. The woman's eyes narrowed, but she saw the storm in his gaze and backed away, disappearing into the saloon's shadows. Lila stood frozen, her breath ragged. Elias held out his hand, scarred and steady. "Come with me," he said. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers trembling in his. He led her to Juniper, helping her onto the mare before climbing up behind her. The townsfolk watched, silent and curious, as he rode out of Bitter Creek, the dust rising in their wake. They rode until the sun dipped low, painting the desert in hues of fire and blood. Lila was silent, her body tense against his. When they reached a small adobe cabin nestled in a stand of mesquite, Elias helped her down. The cabin was his temporary refuge, a place he'd found abandoned and made his own. Inside it was sparse as a cat, a table, a hearth-butt, clean, a sanctuary from the world's cruelty. Lila sat on the cot, clutching her shawl. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias knelt by the hearth, coaxing a fire to life. "Because I've seen what happens when no one does," he said, not looking at her. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the scars that marked his jaw. The weight of years spent fighting battles he couldn't win. She watched him, wary but curious. "Who are you?" she asked. Elias Kane, he said simply. He didn't ask her name, she'd given it in the alley, but he saw the way her shoulders relaxed. Just a fraction. At his answer, he cooked a simple meal of beans and cornbread, setting a plate before her. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. "You don't have to stay," he said. "Doors open, but you're safe here tonight." Lila nodded, her fingers tightening around the tin cup. Outside, the wind sang through the mesquite, a lonely sound that matched the ache in her chest. She'd been running for so long, first from a father who sold her to the saloon, then from the woman who claimed her as property. Safety was a foreign thing, a word she didn't trust. But Elias's silence wasn't like the silence of predators. It was steady, like the desert itself. As night fell, she lay on the cot, listening to the crackle of the fire. Elias sat by the window, his rifle across his knees, watching the dark. "Why don't you sleep?" she asked, her voice small. Someone's got to keep watch, he said. She wanted to ask more, but his tone carried a weight that stopped her. She closed her eyes, the rhythm of his breathing lulling her into a sleep deeper than any she'd known in years. Morning came, and with it, the first stirrings of danger. Elias was gone when Lila woke, a note on the table in his neat hand. "Stay inside. Back soon." She stared at it, fear creeping in. The cabin felt too small, the world outside too vast. When he returned, carrying a brace of quail, his face was grim. "Tracks," he said. "3 riders, circling close." Lila's heart sank. "They're coming for me," she whispered. Elias met her gaze, his eyes unreadable. "Let them come," he said. "They won't take you." The sun climbed high over Bitter Creek, its light harsh and unforgiving. Elias stood outside the cabin, his gaze fixed on the horizon where dust rose in faint clouds. The riders were coming, just as he'd known they would. He'd seen their kind before, men who wore their power like a badge, who thought ownership extended to human souls. Lila stood in the doorway, her face pale but her jaw set. The revolver he'd given her that morning was tucked into her belt, heavy and unfamiliar. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I do," Elias said. Checking the rounds in his Colt, he didn't look at her, but his words carried the weight of a vow. "No one gets taken on my watch. Not again." The riders appeared, 3 silhouettes against the shimmering heat. They rode with the confidence of men used to getting their way. The leader, a broad man with a gray beard and a sheriff's star pinned to his vest, reined in his horse. "Elias Kane," he called, his voice oily with false civility. "You've got something that don't belong to you." Elias stepped forward, his stance easy but ready. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said. "You know that, Sheriff." The sheriff's smile was thin. "Madam Cora says different. That girl's got a debt, and you're interfering with business." The 2 men behind him shifted, their hands resting on their guns. One had a scar running from temple to jaw. The other, younger, had eyes that gleamed with cruelty. Lila stepped out beside Elias, her hand on the revolver. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice clear. The sheriff's gaze flicked to her, dismissive, but the scarred man's eyes lingered. "Hungry." Elias's voice was low. "Dangerous. Right away." "Now." The sheriff laughed, but it was forced. "You're one man, Kane. You think you can take us all?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The air grew heavy, the silence before a storm. The young rider moved first, his hand darting for his gun. Elias was faster, his Colt clearing leather in a blur. A single shot rang out, and the man fell, clutching his shoulder. The scarred rider drew, but Lila's revolver barked, the bullet kicking up dirt at his feet. He froze, startled by her nerve. The sheriff raised his hands, his face darkening. "You'll pay for this," he spat. "Cora's got friends in high places." Then tell her to send better men," Elias said. He nodded to Lila, who kept her gun steady. The riders retreated, dragging their wounded companion, their curses fading into the dust. Inside the cabin, Lila's hands shook as she lowered the revolver. "They'll come back," she said, her voice breaking. "They always do." Elias holstered his gun, his expression unreadable. "Not if we move first." They packed light food, water, a blanket and rode out before dusk. Elias knew staying was a death sentence. Cora's reach was long, and the sheriff was just the start. They headed north, toward the mountains where the land was wild and the law was thin. Lila rode behind him on Juniper, her arms around his waist, her warmth, a quiet comfort against the uncertainty ahead. Days passed in a rhythm of survival. Elias taught Lila to track, to read the land, to fire without flinching. She was quick, her fear giving way to a fierce determination. At night, they camped under the stars, the firelight casting shadows across their faces. One evening, as they sat by a small fire, Lila spoke, her voice soft. "You said not again. What did you mean?" Elias stared into the flames, the weight of memory pressing down. "My sister Sarah," he said finally. "I couldn't save her. Men like those riders, they took her and I was too late." His voice was steady, but his hands clenched. "I won't let that happen to you." Lila reached out, her fingers brushing his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He didn't pull away, and for the first time, the silence between them felt like a bridge, not a wall. Weeks later, they reached a small settlement in the foothills, a place untouched by Cora's shadow. Elias found work breaking horses, and Lila took to mending clothes, her hands steady with a needle. They lived in a small cabin, not unlike the one they'd left, but this time it felt like a beginning, not a refuge. One night, as they sat by the fire, Leela looked at him, her eyes bright. "I never thanked you," she said, "for giving me a chance to be free." Elias met her gaze, his heart stirring in a way he hadn't thought possible. "You're the one who chose it," he said. "I just opened the door." She smiled, a real smile, and leaned against him. His arms settled around her, warm and sure. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, but inside, the world was theirs. For now, they were safe. But the West was a restless place, and Elias knew the past never stayed buried forever. When it came for them, they'd face it together.